Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's treat cart add-on smoothies and juice, veggie happy, garden before and afters, butterfly kisses, backyard bird feeder add-on, and porcupine for you add-on. So I stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers to match some pattern paper from the What's Sewing On 6x6 pad. So I'll tear out the little piece that I want to use as my color inspiration and tuck that under my cardstock panel. So I'm going to start with my bunnies, and I'm going to be using E50, E51, E53 and E55 for them. Starting with my E55 and laying in my shadows on the head and on the lower part of the body. I want to have the middle of the body be white, so I'm going to leave that alone for now. I'll start blending out that E55 with the E53. And just make sure to go over the edge of that previous shade so that I can break up any harsh lines as I pull that first shade into the mid-tone. And then I'm going to use the E51 for the highlight. So for the top and the bottom of the body, I'm just using those darkest three shades. And I'm also going to color one of their ears to be solid brown, and the other ear I'm going to add some little spots to, just to kind of mix things up a bit, give them a little extra personality. I'll use the E50 to add some shading to the white parts of their body, including that other ear, and I switched which ear it was on each of the bunnies. And then I'll go back in with that E55 and add a few little dots to that white ear. And then I'll blend that out with the E53 and then the E51. And then I'm going to let these bunnies dry for a minute, and then I'll come back and add some extra detail by doing some dots onto the brown parts of their body with the E55 and also the E53. And again, that just gives them a little extra personality, a little texture to their fur. I'm going to give them some rosy cheeks using R00, R01, and R02. I'll also color in the insides of their ears with all three shades, and I'll fill in their noses with just the R02 since it's such a small area. I also want to use this combo for some of my additional images. So I'm going to do every other stripe on the awning of my treat cart, which is actually going to be a flower cart for today's card. I think that treat cart is so versatile and is able to be transformed into lots of different things. And I even took a little sentiment from the Backyard Bird Feeder add-on, the one that says Seeds the Day, and I used that as the name of my flower cart. So I just stamped that right on that line and masked off the exclamation point so that it fit in there perfectly. I'm going to color in the top little flower on my little tiny cactus and the heart on my card. I'll do the littlest flowers in my row planter, and also the heart on my chalkboard and that little peach or apple that I stamped at the top of the chalkboard. I'm also going to color in the worm with these shades, and I added the R02 to every other stripe on his body to just give him a little extra definition. And then I'm going to do one extra flower. Next, I'm going to bring in E95, E97, and E99. This is my favorite combo for kind of like a terracotta shade. And I'm going to do every other stripe on my awning. I thought the kind of earthy terracotta with that peachy pink would be a pretty combo, although I am being very cautious with how much I use that terracotta shade because I don't want this to end up looking like a fall card. And so I'm just going to use it a little bit sparingly. I'm using it on that awning, and then I'll also use it on all of the pots that my flowers or plants are in or will be in. So I'm adding that E99 in first, and I'm putting that on the left or right of most of the pots. The long one I put it on both sides just because it is so long, so I wanted to have a little extra definition on both edges. But once I have that E99 laid in and place that under the lip of the planter to cast a little bit of shadow there, I'm going to blend that out with the E97. And again, I just kind of picked the area to shade based on where I wanted to put them on the card. I always like to lay all of my images out first and kind of arrange the stamps before I start creating, and that way I kind of know how many things I need and where they're going to go. And sometimes that does change a little bit on the card, but usually I stick pretty close to my original vision. So then I'm going to move on to some yellows as I'm pulling out the yellow in that pattern paper. And I went with Y11, Y13, and Y15. I'm going to do the petals of the large flower in the center of that long planter, and then I'll do the centers of all the other flowers. I also added a touch of yellow to the handle of my little spade, and I'm going to make my butterflies yellow as well, just so we'll have a nice little sunny pop of color in the sky. Then I'll bring in some blue. I'm using B00, B01, and B02, and I'm going to do this tall little stem of flowers from the Backyard Bird Feeder add-on, and also the flowers on the ends of the long planters. I'm adding the darkest color closest to the stem or closest to the center, depending on which of those I'm working on, and then just blending out from there, going lighter as I get toward the edges of the petals. And then I'm also going to just add a little bit of that B00 to the card, and then I'll blend that out with B00 so it looks white. And then I'll switch to some greens. I'm using G21, G24, and G28. I'm going to add that to my grasses, starting with the G28. I'll also add it to some of my leaves, most of the leaves, and I'm going to blend that out with the G24. For the grasses, I'm kind of doing little flicking motions so that it kind of mimics the shape of the grass. And then for the leaves, I put the darkest at the base and the highlight on the tips of the leaves, just like I did with my flowers. Then I'm going to use that G21 for my highlight to finish those off. And then I wanted to have just a little bit of contrast with that greenery, so I'm going to bring in the G20. And for the rest of my greenery, like the cactus and the little leaf on the chalkboard stand and the other two flowers, I'm going to start with the G24, blend out with the G21, and then use the G20 as my highlight. Next, I'll bring in some gray tones, again to match the background of that pattern paper. I'm going to use T0, T1, and T3. I'm going to color in my watering can to be silver. So I'm placing my shadows on both the left and the right, but a little more heavy-handed on the left, and then creating kind of like a shine mark over towards the front of it on the side. I'll also do my spade in this combo. And then I'm going to darken it up by adding in the T5 as well. And I'll color in the wheels of my flower cart using the T5 first, blending out with the T3 and then the T1. I'm also going to use these for the chalkboard part of my sign, using that T5 all the way to the edge because I want to make sure that you can still read the little sentiment that I stamped on there. That I Love Seeds is also from the Backyard Bird Feeder add-on. And then I'll blend toward the center with the T3 and then the T1. And then I'm going to also do the little handle of the flower cart and the spade with just the T5 and T3. I did the centers of the wheels with the T0. And then I'm going to go back to my brown shades. So the E53 and the E55 I used on my bunnies, but I added in the E57 to just make it a little bit darker. I did the center of that small flower so that it can look like a sunflower. I'm also going to do the outer portion of my chalkboard sign. I started with the E55 for that, blended out with the E53, and then I'll add a little bit of wood grain texture to that just by adding in some little lines with that E57. And I added just a few with the E55 as well. And then I'm going to do the rest of my treat cart. I had wanted to do it in brown because I thought that that just really fit with the rest of the colors that I had used on it, but I was nervous that it was going to look too fall-like. So I kind of saved it for last to see if any other color could work. But in the end, I just decided that brown was the way to go. And I'm really glad that I trusted my instinct because I feel like that just pulled everything together really well. And I don't think it ended up looking like a fall card. I think the pops of blue in there really translate more towards spring, and then also just tying it in with the more pastel shades of the pattern paper. But if you swapped the blue for like a burgundy, I think it could be a fall card really easily. But that's great that you can kind of take a design like this through the different seasons. So I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I've trimmed down a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock with the second largest of the large stitched rounded rectangle stackables. I have both my large and small together on one sheet, so it was the third one, but it was the second of the large. And then I'm going to do a simple watercolor wash background. This is a really effective way to create a background when you've spent a lot of time coloring your images, and also for a background like this one where not a lot of it is going to show anyway. So I'm going to watercolor using some tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink to start. That is what I'm going to use for my sky, and then I'm going to add in some salvage patina to just brighten it up in a few little places. And I'm purposely being kind of messy with it. I actually think that it looks the best when I don't try too hard. It ends up looking kind of cloudy and more realistic, like a sky. And then for the grass, I'm going to start with some mowed lawn. I'm going to butt that right up against the sky portion and kind of let them blend a little bit together where they're both wet. And then I'll also bring in some rustic wilderness just for a bit of added dimension. And again, I'm just going to kind of dot it here and there, add a few little streaks. I love creating these types of backgrounds. I just think they're so quick and easy and effective. And then I'm going to set this aside to dry completely. Once it has, I will pop it in my MISTI so that I can stamp a sentiment down at the bottom. Since I already have the large Seeds the Day on my treat cart, I'm going to go with just a small sentiment which says Sending Love, and this is from the Butterfly Kisses stamp set. I stamped that down twice to make sure it was nice and legible. And then I'll pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using sticky note cardstock and stamping in Peachy Keen ink. And I'm stamping a large flower in a pot and Hope Your Day Blooms with Happiness, which I think is a great universal sentiment that works great for so many different occasions. Then I'm going to go back to my What's Sewing On pattern paper pad, and I'm going to find the sheet that I used as my inspiration. I just need a larger piece of it, and I will tear that out. And then I'm going to go through my scraps in the front and see what I have to use, if there's anything that will work well with this. And I decided to go with this yellow and also this peach. And then I wanted to add that blue in there as well, since those three shades were kind of the main part of my color palette for my Copic coloring. So I'm going to try to figure out a way to use all four of these together on the card. So I've trimmed those down with the largest of the large stitch rectangle stackables, and I'm going to glue that to the front of my card with the glue tube. So I'm just adding my liquid glue all around the edges and then holding that down in place, matching up those corners. And to make sure that I got my stitching detail lined up, I did hold those extra pieces in place with some post-it tape. So I'm just going to lift that up and glue them down one by one before I remove that post-it tape. And that way I know that everything is perfectly aligned. And then I can peel those off, and I'll add my final piece over top, which is going to be that peach piece. And I think these patterns actually worked even better than I hoped layered together, because the yellow and the blue are a bit more tone on tone, whereas the peach stands out against the background a little bit more. I'm also going to add my focal panel, just popping that up with some Scotch 3M foam tape so that I have some dimension on this scene. And I'm going to make sure that's lined up in the center and then press that down into place. And then I can bring in my images. I typically like to start with my largest image first, so that is going to be my treat cart. I've added more foam tape to the back of that to pop it up and give it more dimension, and I'm going to place that right up toward the top of the grass line, and then I'll add my little bunny kind of peeking out from behind that. He's going to be my flower seller. Then I'm going to take that large row of flowers and I'll add some foam tape to the back of that and just some liquid glue where the flowers are going to overlap the treat cart. I'll place that right below the treat cart, making sure that I don't cover up the Seeds the Day part so that you're still able to read it. And then I'll add my little chalkboard sign over toward the top of the grass line on the right. For top of that, I'm going to add the other little bunny who's hopping up to the flower stand to buy some flowers for the recipient. And then I also added a butterfly into the sky. I decided to hold off on adding the second butterfly till the end so that I can make sure I have it exactly where I want it once I see how the rest of the card is coming together. I'll add an extra little pot and flower over to the far left, and then I wanted to have a second pot with the additional flower next to that, but I didn't want them on the same level, so I decided to adjust the one on the far left just slightly up, and that way I could add this second one just a little bit below and beside it, and that way I didn't have to cover up any part of my sentiment. So I'll just tuck that blue flower in there, and then next to that I'm going to place the watering can. And I always just check by holding the image up to the place that I want to add it to see where I need to add foam tape and where I need to add liquid glue. I'm going to put the large patch of grass right below the terracotta pots, kind of overlapping those. And then I'm going to add another smaller patch of grass over by the bunny. And then I am going to take the card and add that to the flower cart. So he's also selling cards along with his flowers in case you want to pick it up for a gift. And then I'm going to give him the little cactus in his hand because that is what the bunny has decided to purchase today. I added another little patch of grass to help fill in the front of the scene and the cute little inchworm in front of the watering can. Then I'll take that spade and add that at a diagonal in front of that far right patch of grass. And then all that's left is that final little butterfly, and I put that over toward the left side above the handle of the flower cart. Of course, this card needs to have a little bit of sparkle on it, so I'm going to take some Stardust Stickles and add it here and there. I put it on the butterflies, on the heart on the card, on the flower of the cactus, the centers of all of the flowers, the little heart on the chalkboard sign. And that is going to complete this one. So I'll lift that up so you can see it in a bit more detail. Hopefully catch some sparkle and shine and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please give it a like and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. This one will also be on the Lawn Fawn blog and YouTube channel today, so if you'd like to check it out again, you can watch it over there, and I would really appreciate the support. All of the products I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself, and I'll also put up 2 extra videos in case you'd like to keep watching. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another. Bye-bye.